Nearly a decade ago, Elon Musk offered a stranded woman a lift home. But it was only 3 years later that she discovered who he really was. Catherine was on her way home late at night when her car suddenly stalled on a deserted road. The air was chilly, and the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly around her, with only the occasional headlights from a distant car passing by. She checked her phone, but had no signal, and her battery was almost dead. Starting to feel anxious, the thought of waiting there alone, stranded in the cold, made her uneasy. Just as Catherine was weighing her options, walking back to the last gas station she'd seen, or waiting for another car, a sleek, dark car slowed down and pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and the driver leaned over, asking if she needed help. He looked friendly, a man in his 40s with a relaxed, casual demeanor. She hesitated, but decided there wasn't much choice. When he offered her a ride, Catherine accepted, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness as she got into the passenger seat. As they pulled away from the side of the road, Catherine felt a little uneasy about riding with a complete stranger. But the driver's calm, laid-back attitude quickly put her at ease. He wasn't flashy at all, just wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. The car itself was unremarkable, something you might rent from any airport. Nothing about him or the car screamed danger. He started a conversation, asking her if she'd had a long night and what she did for work. His voice was friendly but unassuming, and his questions didn't feel nosy. Before long, the conversation shifted. He started sharing some of his thoughts about where the world was headed, speaking about big, ambitious ideas, ways technology might change how we live, and what the future could look like. His ideas sounded like they belonged in a science fiction movie, but he talked about them in a way that felt realistic, even practical. Catherine found herself leaning in, genuinely intrigued. She thought he was just one of those highly intelligent, thoughtful people you rarely meet. The kind who see the world a little differently. She didn't think much more about it, figuring he was just a nice guy with a lot of interesting opinions. As they drove along the dark road, their conversation kept flowing, and Catherine found herself more and more drawn in. They started talking about space exploration and how humanity might one day live on other planets. He mentioned electric cars, artificial intelligence, and ideas that felt as if they were taken straight from the future. Every now and then, he'd share his own views, opinions that sounded so forward-thinking they almost didn't seem real. Catherine's curiosity got the better of her, and she couldn't help but ask, "So, are you a scientist or something? Maybe an entrepreneur?" He just chuckled and brushed off the question as if it wasn't important, shifting the conversation back to her life instead. Catherine let it go, deciding he must just be a smart, interesting guy who thought big. After a while, they pulled up in front of Catherine's building. She felt a mix of relief and gratitude, thanking the man for his kindness and admitting how rare it felt these days for strangers to lend a hand. He smiled and nodded, brushing it off like it was nothing special. Before she got out, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. It was plain, no company logo or title, just the name Elon and an email address typed neatly underneath. "Here," he said, "just in case you ever want to talk more about those ideas." Catherine took the card, glancing at it for a second before slipping it into her bag. She thanked him one last time, and with a quick wave, he drove off into the night. As she walked up to her door, Catherine chuckled to herself about the whole experience. It wasn't every day that you got a late-night ride from a stranger who talked like he had the future mapped out. She assumed he was just one of those eccentric tech fans, someone with a lot of ideas, but not necessarily the means to make them happen. She stashed the card in a drawer, figuring it was just a nice memento from a strange evening. In the months that followed, Catherine moved on with her life. She went back to her usual routine, busy with work, friends, and all the little things that make up everyday life. Every so often, she'd remember the odd encounter, but it always felt like a minor event. One of those stories you tell a few times to friends and then let fade away. She never felt compelled to reach out to the man or use the email address he'd given her. The card just sat in her drawer, gradually becoming one of those random things you forget about over time. Occasionally, she'd catch news stories about some tech visionary named Elon Musk. His face seemed familiar, but she never made the connection. The stories were about rockets, electric cars, and all kinds of futuristic projects that felt far removed from her everyday life. Catherine just kept moving forward, thinking of that night as a quirky memory, but nothing more. She had no reason to believe it was anything significant, and certainly no idea who her driver had actually been. It was 3 years later that a once stranded woman found out who was the man behind the wheel. Catherine was scrolling through her phone when a headline caught her attention. It was a video clip about Elon Musk, the same tech figure she'd seen mentioned here and there over the years. This time, the clip was a deep dive into his work on space travel, electric cars, and even artificial intelligence. She decided to watch, curious to learn more about someone who seemed to be shaping the future. As she watched, something clicked. The face on the screen looked so familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Then, like a light bulb going off, she had a flashback to that night 3 years ago. The face, the name, the casual conversation about space and technology. It hit her all at once that Elon Musk had been the one who gave her a ride. She sat there in shock, feeling her heartbeat pick up. She replayed that evening in her mind, remembering his calm demeanor, the way he'd hinted at big dreams, and the card he'd given her. She could hardly believe it. She'd shared a car ride with one of the most famous innovators of her time, without even realizing it. Catherine's reaction was instant. Her eyes widened and she froze in place, staring at the screen in disbelief. She could feel her heart pounding, trying to wrap her mind around the fact that Elon Musk, the Elon Musk who'd made headlines around the world, was the same man who had given her a ride that cold, dark night. The realization felt surreal, and she found herself replaying their conversation, finally understanding how much he had hinted at without giving away his identity. She remembered how he had spoken about technology, space, and the future, as if they were personal missions. His ideas had been so visionary, and now it all made sense. He wasn't just some tech enthusiast. He was one of the most ambitious minds of her time, with the influence and means to actually make those dreams a reality. She sat there, stunned, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and astonishment. She had unknowingly shared an evening with a man who was not only changing the world, but was also shaping the future in ways she hadn't fully grasped back then. With her pulse still racing, Catherine leaned back and let her mind drift back to that night, combing through every detail of their encounter with fresh eyes. She remembered his calm confidence, his choice of words, and even the way he had laughed off her questions about his work. What once seemed like casual conversation now appeared loaded with meaning. She realized he had been hinting at incredible things, speaking about the future as if it were right in front of him. As she thought about it, a wave of regret washed over her. She wished she had recognized him, if not by face, then by his unmistakable passion for technology and humanity's potential. She even regretted not reaching out after that night, brushing off his email address as just a nice gesture. She felt a pang of curiosity about how things might have unfolded if she'd stayed in touch. As Catherine sat looking back on that night, a deep sense of respect for Elon Musk blossomed. She realized how genuine and unassuming he had been, even when he had every reason to act otherwise. There he was, one of the world's most influential men, with fortunes and projects that could change humanity's future. Yet he'd gone out of his way to help a stranger stranded on a dark road. He'd spoken to her as an equal, with kindness and no hint of ego, never once revealing who he truly was. It was a rare humility she now recognized as even more remarkable. The encounter shifted Catherine's view of the world. She'd seen firsthand that kindness and generosity could come from anyone, regardless of their wealth or power. Reflecting on his actions, she realized how much that moment had encouraged her own small acts of kindness over the years. That night's conversation had stayed with her, nudging her to believe in the good intentions of others, even in moments where she doubted it. Elon's humility and quiet generosity had inspired her, and she felt a new sense of admiration for the man who was not just a tech visionary, but also, as she now saw, an extraordinary human being. With her heart racing from the revelation, Catherine found herself digging through her drawer for the card he'd given her that night, 3 years ago. She almost couldn't believe she'd kept it all this time, tucked away among old receipts and expired coupons. But there it was, a small business card with the simple name Elon scrolled across the front and an email address beneath it. It felt surreal, holding that piece of paper now, knowing what she did. She sat down, took a deep breath, and typed out a message on her phone, hesitating just a moment before hitting send. Hi, Elon. Not sure if you remember me, but 3 years ago, you gave me a ride when my car broke down late one night. I just wanted to thank you again and to tell you that I only recently realized who you really are. The conversation we had meant a lot to me, even if I didn't fully understand it back then. To her surprise, a response arrived later that day. The message was brief but warm, thanking her for reaching out and suggesting they catch up over coffee. She reread it several times, almost not believing it was real. Could it really be the same Elon Musk she'd seen splashed across news headlines and magazine covers? And if so, did he really remember her? It felt like a stretch. Yet here was the email, clear as day. The day of their meeting came, and Catherine arrived early. She looked around the coffee shop, wondering what it would be like to talk with him now that she knew the truth. When he walked in, she recognized him instantly, and her nerves melted away in an unexpected wave of familiarity. He looked just as he had that night, relaxed, a bit unassuming, with the same friendly smile. As he spotted her and walked over, he extended his hand. Catherine, of course I remember, he said warmly as they shook hands. It's good to see you again. They settled into a comfortable conversation, picking up as if no time had passed. Catherine felt a sense of ease that surprised her. She recounted the events of that night, the anxiety she'd felt on that dark, lonely road, and how his unexpected kindness had completely turned things around. She told him how she'd thought about that encounter over the years, but never once suspected that her kind stranger had been the same man she now recognized as Elon Musk. After a moment, Elon leaned forward, looking at her thoughtfully. You know, Catherine, I meet a lot of people, but there's something about certain encounters that sticks with you. People who have that kind of impact on others are rare, and I don't say this often, but if you ever wanted to work with us at one of my companies, I think there would be a place for you. Catherine felt a rush of disbelief and excitement. Here she was, sitting across from one of the most influential people in the world, being offered an opportunity she hadn't even dreamed of. She could barely process his words, but in that moment, she felt more than anything an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Elon continued, "I look for people who understand that technology and kindness should go hand in hand. You told me that conversation stuck with you, but it did for me too. I want people on my team who to see the bigger picture and care about the world, not just the bottom line." Catherine was taken aback, barely able to believe her luck. Their conversation continued, touching on the projects he was working on, his vision for the future, and his thoughts on the role of humanity in a changing world. Catherine found herself captivated, reminded of the insightful conversation they'd shared that night on the road, but now with a clearer understanding of who he was and the weight behind his words. As they wrapped up their meeting, Elon handed her his personal number. "If you ever need anything or just want to talk, reach out. And if you decide to join one of the teams, we'll be lucky to have you." As they said their goodbyes, Catherine felt a sense of closure, but also a new beginning. She knew things were about to change in ways she could hardly anticipate, all thanks to a stranger's ride on a cold night and the kindness that had brought them back together. Do you think that Catherine took the job? And do you know any similar heartwarming stories? If you do, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.